So in our last video, this is where we got to in our Visual Basic. We designed our form, which if I just go back to it, looked a little bit, like that, where we've got the four fields F, L, T, and W that are aligned to the four names of the four variables we were being given to input. So this is following Workbook 5. There we go, there's our four inputs that we need to take in. And we're now looking to develop our code a little bit further. So the code as we left it, I'll clear that sub. We've got it looking at sheet 1, turning on sheet 1, looking at what's in the first box. If it's not blank, storing it in cell B1. Same for the second box, but storing it in B2. For the thickness, storing it in B3, and for the width, storing it in B4. Closes the form, does some calculations, and stores the ultimate stress that we've calculated in cell B6. And for the purpose of the last video, I just fixed the point that we were doing the calculation, and I said it was going to be about halfway along the length of the beam. What we're going to do now is we're going to step this up one stage further. So if I find my, there we go, find the workbook, you can see we've actually got 6 different points along the beam. So x was equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So I'm going to say, okay, we're going to look at 6 evenly distributed points along our length. And that's what we're going to program it to do. That will then allow us to plot graphs like the one at the bottom. So we're going to tweak the code very slightly. The first thing we're going to do, we're not going to have x as a fixed value anymore. So it's not going to be just defined as one fixed value. So we're going to say, we're going to have a loop in here, and we're going to say for x equals 0. So we're going to start with x equals 0 all the way to the point that x equals L. So you can just say from x equals 0 to L. Going in steps, and those steps, because I want 6 steps, I'm going to say 0.2 times L. So that will give me 6 steps total from 0 to L. What do I want it to do in those steps? Well, I wanted it to do the moment calculation. I want it to work out half the thickness. And I want it to work out the moment of inertia, exactly the same as before. I then want it to calculate the stress exactly as before, but I don't want it to output into one cell anymore, because I'm going to be going around this loop 6 times. So in my workbook, I've handily added now some headings. So I'm going to have these 4 values here are going to get filled in, but I'm going to want this table filling in as well. Could put some borders on it, couldn't I? There we go. So I'm going to want the yellow cells of my table filling in as well, so that they match the table here, where I've got the 6 rows being filled in with an x value, so how far along the beam I'm analysing, the moment that I'm calculating, and the stress that I'm calculating as well. Obviously my units won't be the same, because the units that I've asked for the inputs to be in are not the same. So no calculations will be in the sheet, we're going to do it all in Visual Basic. But rather than specifying one particular range of cells, I'm going to define it in a different way. So there were 2 different ways I showed in the tutorial about defining a particular cell. One was that range function, and the other was cells. So cells, and then I could say row 2, or it would be row 6, wouldn't it? Column 2. That was the first place that we were dropping our value. That's row 6, column 2 is cell B6. That would work exactly the same as what I had there before with range B6 in quotation marks. It would do the same thing. Well, the cells I actually want to work in, I want B6 to actually be the moment, and I want C6 to be the stress. So my stress value, I'm going to put in column 3, and then I'm going to copy that same code for the 3 of them. So in column 1, which is column A, I wanted the X value that I'm calculating, so between 0 and L in our steps. So in column B, which will be our second column, and I'll change that in a minute, I wanted the moment, which was our M value. So that will go in column B or column 2. And then in column 3, I want the stress. Now that's absolutely fine, but the problem we'll have is that I'll say for x equals 0, it'll run the calculations for x equals 0, it'll put all the numbers in. Then there's a bit we need to say next, so it knows, okay, go on to the next value of x. So it will go back up to here. It'll say, okay, x equals 0.2 times L. It'll put in 0.2 times L in here. It'll do all the calculations, and it will overwrite the previous calculations. That's not what we want. So we want the row that we're storing in to go up each time as well. So we're going to want to say, okay, outside, we're going to want another variable, an extra variable. I'm going to call it Z. Don't know why I could call it R, couldn't I? I suppose let's call it R for row. I'm going to say equals 5 at the moment. And I'm saying it equals 5 because in a minute I'm going to say R equals R plus 1. Now, depending on where I write that, in fact, we could be even cleverer, couldn't we? We could say it equals 6 to start with. And then we can say down here when we've finished, R equals R plus 1. So my row number that I'm interested in recording in equals 6. It does all the calculations. It records not in cell 6.1 but in cell R1. It runs those calculations. It stores those numbers that we've calculated in column 1, row 6, column 2, row 6, column 3, row 6. It then increases the value of R by 1 and goes round again the next step and changes X as well. Does all the calculations again and stores it this time in R plus 1 and then increases R by 1 again. Once we've got to the end of those steps, once we've got from to the point of X equaling L, it's then going to stop. So that is all we need to do to tweak the code to make it store the values we're expecting, and it should give us a table like the one in our workbook. So if I bring the workbook back up and put it on one side of the screen, and I bring my form up, it's not going to let me do that. Let me, there we go, bring my form up on the other side of the screen. Apologies, that's the wrong user form because I've got the other example workbook open as well. Because I'm going to give you that one as well in a minute. This user form. It's not going well, is it? Wrong. There we go. So if we type in the 4 values that are given here, although the units are different, the numbers will be the same. So our force, they've given it in a different order, but the force was 5. The beam length was 5. The beam thickness was 0.5. And the beam width was 0.75. If I then click submit, I can go back into my workbook and you can see I've got my values here of X. I've got my moment, which matches the table, and I've got my stress values, which again match the table. And from that, I can plot the graph like they've got in the bottom corner. The one last little bit, just to make it slightly more user-friendly, so I don't have that irritation with loading the wrong form, I could have an extra little module in here, and I've showed this before. Let's call it go user form 1.show. So I've just written an extra little module, right-clicked and added a module, inserted a module, called it Go, and it's just going to show user form 1. And all that's going to do, when I insert, I'm just going to put in a random shape. We can then right click and assign a macro. It should say Go there. So now when I click that, it loads the form. I can click submit and it'll update all the numbers. So if I were to change my numbers, that's quite thick, isn't it? And beam width of 0.5. You can see it's updated. The X values, the moments, the stresses, the distance along the beam we're analysing, the moment and the stress in the beam. Few little things to remember when you're doing these types of activity with Visual Basic and macros. Just a reminder to save the workbook either as an XLSM file, so a macro enabled workbook, or as an XLSB file, so a binary workbook. Again, the key difference there being a binary enabled workbook. If you ever want to mail merge for any reason into a Word document, binary workbooks you can, macro enabled ones you can't. If you're doing this on an Apple, some of the forms don't necessarily work exactly the same. I'm not sure you've got the same functionality in Visual Basic on Apple, so you might have to use the remote desktop or the Office 365 online versions. And then some practicalities. If you're trying to move things like this, it's very difficult to move because you're clicking on the button. You can go on the Developer tab and you can go into Design mode. I was hoping that was going to allow me to click the button, but it didn't. Okay, you can also right-click the button, and that click and drag, and that allows you to move it because it's obviously not easy to click like you would a normal shape. So another feature there that might be useful, just some little practicalities. And I think with Visual Basic as well, that pretty much is it. There's tell a lie, there's one other useful feature that you might find useful. If you find that you've got your form and you think, actually, I wanted an extra field in here. At the moment, it's a very neat, because of the way I've built it up, I can hit tab on the keyboard and move to these different text fields very easily. And if I tab again, it goes to submit. If I make another text box in the editor, so if I drop another one on, it's going to change it's not going to go in such a nice order. So it will go to the submit button and then to the last thing you add. So it's ordered, that the tab order is the order that you created things. I just happen to create these 4 boxes sequentially. If you ever want to change that tab order, you can click on the boxes, and one of the properties is the tab index. So that's tab index 4, remembering there are some labels as well here that you can't tab between, so they don't do anything. But the next one will be tab index, you'll see it's tab index 5, the next one will be 6, the next one will be 7, etc. So you can reorder the tab index, and that just makes navigating it with the keyboard slightly better. Again, not necessarily something about the Visual Basic code, but a nice feature to edit if you're trying to make this a user-friendly form. I think that probably answers the workbook task. So we've designed our solver to have those 4 inputs and to be doing those calculations and getting the outputs. You can improve it. You can have it plotting the graph if you want, using the macro to plot the graph. You can take a screen grab of the images and import them into here using the image tool, so you can add it to the form so people know what those 4 variables are without having to look it up somewhere else and look on another workbook. But the actual essence of the code and we've captured in those few lines. So that concludes the video or the second part of the video for Workbook 5.